All right. Welcome to the
Man.
Domestic Draft Podcast. I'm Evan Bierman here with Dan Slowick. Dan, I see you cracking a beer already. Let's get it going. What do you got?
It's good too. I have a brewery here in San Diego. It's in Carlsbad, San Diego, which is North County. You were there, Evan, kind of during my wedding. We were up over there. So this brewery is called Ruler, but it's spelled a little bit different. It's spelled Rouleur. And the reason for that, it's a position in like cycling, I believe, in like old like French cycling when they used to like cycle indoors and like forever, kind of like those steeped tracks and whatnot. Because this brewery was founded, and a little history about it, was founded in 2017 by Raleigh Macias, who's a kind of cycler himself. So he kind of had that name ready, and it also pays a little attention to kind of the foundation of the brewery and kind of what they feel like their message is. So a little bit about Raleigh is that he was a home brewer, like most of these breweries we kind of talk about start. And he was actually a judge as well for a lot of the brewing competitions here. So he was like really immersed in that whole entire lifestyle. He was judging competitions, judging beers, and then he started to brew his own. And he started to think, like, why does everything have to fit certain categories? Why does a Pilsner have to look and taste this way? Why does, IPA have to look and taste a certain way? And he started playing with appearances and mouthfeel and taste and all of those things, and started making these like hybrid beers. And once he started getting feedback that they weren't like fitting in the categories and they weren't able to be like judged, he kind of had a light bulb moment and said, why not have a brewery that does that kind of thing and kind of bends the norm a little bit and introduces new kinds of beers to the public. So he opened his brewery in 2017. They have great fanfare. They have 2 locations up here in North County. The beer I'm drinking, it's called Domestic Blonde Ale, and it's really good. It's got a 3.7 on Untapped. The first thing is that, blonde ales sometimes are very like crisp, easy, and very light. This is a little full body flavor. It almost has like a hef when you taste those cloves and banana flavor to it. And I really like it. I think this is a really good beer. It's nice that it's here up in North County too. Ruler Brewing up in Carlsbad. Evan, what do you got?
Nice. So you're doing the craft route. I'm doing something a little bit different. I've got Stella Artois. And the reason I have this is because my brother just moved. I mentioned that to you on the pre-show. I had my dad go and pick up beer, and I said, Dad, just pick up whatever you want, right? And what is our parents' generation, what are they looking for? They're going to grab the Stella. Yeah. So if you don't know, Stella is owned by Interbrew International. It's a subsidiary of Anheuser-Busch InBev, but their origin story dates back over 600 years to the Den Hoorn Brewery in Leuven, Belgium, founded in 1366. So everybody's seen this bottle, this logo. This is actually the oldest logo in the world. And the horn on there references the Den Hoorn Brewery that this beer came from, 600 years ago. Sebastian Artois bought and renamed the business in 1717 after becoming the head brewer in 1708. And Stella, which is actually Latin for star, was added to the name in 1926 when they released their first seasonal beer, the Christmas Star. So a star has been proudly displayed on the bottles ever since. They changed the name to Stella Artois, and the rest is history from there.
Damn.
It doesn't get a very good score on Untapped. It gets a 3.27. Untapped is more, in my opinion, craft beer scores.
Right.
But it's 5%. It's a great beer. I think it's a good celebratory beer. Dad, I think you did okay. We are celebrating a little bit, I think, today, just talking about the Cubs. I love talking about spring training and the Cubs. Everybody has reported now. We've got a little bit more, I think, of the roster that we're going to see as the, season begins here. So we're bringing on Cody Delmendo from CHGO. He does CHGO Cubs podcast. You can find him on Twitter at Cody_CHGO. Cody, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. I was very entertained by the different beers you guys got. I got my 312 here.
Perfect.
Fun story that I can't. Well, I'm not going to purposely tweet it out, but I've been doing this bit the last couple days because we just got a new beer partner at work. But I've been doing this new bit saying that I have 8 cases of this specific beer at home, but it's actually 8 cases of 312 because they're an old partner and we needed to get all all of the 312 out of our office. So they were like, here, take this, guys. Like they put it all on a big cart, and they were like, please take this because we got this new partner coming in. And I was like, don't hold me back. Like,
no problem to have.
Twist your arm, huh?
So I have like 8 cases of 312 in my kitchen right now. So
that's awesome.
Perfect.
Who's the new beer partner, if you don't mind us asking?
Molson Coors. So, but each podcast has like different beers. So like for us, it's Blue Moon. I know the Bears are CHGO Bears is Miller Lite. And the other ones I'm not exactly sure because I haven't tuned into the Blackhawks or the Bulls podcast for a while for good reason because they're not any good as in the team. So it's been hard to tune in. I'm pretty casual. I'm honestly I'm not a big hockey guy. I guess I follow hockey more so now just because I want the Blackhawks to be good for us for business.
Very similar for us too, yeah.
Right.
I'm not big Blackhawks guys either.
And the Bulls, like I have honestly, it sucks. Like I would argue when I was a kid, like in the 2000s when I was in high school, that I was probably a bigger Bulls fan than I was a Cubs fan because Derrick Rose was my favorite athlete.
Good teams, yeah.
Right. And they had some good teams. And honestly, since the day that they traded him, I've had little to no interest in them. And the only reason I really watch them now is because I'm an Illinois fan and Ayo Dosunmu is on the team. So like it's been very hard to want to keep up with them. For like 2 months after they signed DeMar DeRozan and Lonzo Ball, I was interested. It was like
seems like forever ago that happened though.
Right.
So long ago.
Yeah. But anyway, I don't know who their partners are, but they're all under the Molson Coors family. And so for Cubs,
that's awesome.
Yeah. So for Cubs, we're Blue Moon, and so like it's part of the
great beer. That's a great beer.
That's a good.
It is a great beer. I honestly would prefer that it was 8 cases of Blue Moon instead of 312 personally.
That was kind of like
my beer is free beer.
Exactly. Yeah. I feel like Blue Moon was my first intro into kind of the crafty world of beer starting out. So
there's something about, and I don't know if this is just a me and like my college friends thing, but there's something about going to like B-dubs, getting wings and getting a Blue Moon. Is that like
that's a good spot to get one. Yeah, that might have been where I had my first Blue Moon as well. Yeah.
I feel like that was where I had my first Blue Moon was at B-dubs, and
upscale.
Get the orange in teriyaki, the chicken teriyaki wings. Get the Blue Moon with the orange slice, and you're having a night.
Yeah.
I want to talk. I'm curious of how you got into being on the podcast for CHGO. In your bio, it says you're a media personality, and I'm just curious. Yeah, and you're laughing. So I'm curious when that like started, or did you? What were you doing prior, and how did that like evolve into now working for CHGO?
This always turns into this like long spiel, so I'll try and keep it short. When I was in college, I went to Eastern Illinois University.
Go Panthers!
Go Panthers! When I was in college, Garoppolo was still there, so he was like a legend on campus, still is. Tony Romo went there. Sean Payton went there. Yeah.
Shanahan, right? Yeah.
Mike Shanahan. Yeah. I was rooting for the 49ers in the Super Bowl just because his dad did my commencement. Anyway, I was a journalism major there. And so I always wanted to be in media, kind of, not necessarily growing up, but as I got older and when I was in college, and I did like radio, I did the newspaper, did yearbook, all that kind of like student media stuff. And but when I was in college, I legitimately wanted to be a reporter, which is like, when I think about it now, it's funny because I'm just so far away from that. But when I graduated, I took like the first job that was offered to me. I tell people this all the time, that it was like one of the biggest mistakes of my career, that I just like took a job that was in the field, and like I thought I just needed to get a job in the field. That way I was in the field, and it was going to be like I knew it was probably going to suck, but like it was just going to get me into the industry, and hopefully I would build up from there. But for various reasons, it was a big mistake. But after about 5.5 months there, I found my first sports journalism job, sports media job, whatever. It was covering like high school sports under this newspaper that was part of the Journal-Star in Peoria, Illinois. It was located in Pekin, which is just like, I guess you could call it a suburb of Peoria. but it was under Gatehouse Media, and I covered like all of like the, like, I guess you would call suburbs of Peoria, like Morton, Washington, East Peoria, some of these smaller towns that had like, you know, a couple thousand people in it. Just real small town high school sports. Like people, like the people downstate in Illinois, like really get into that shit. They see
a lot of driving.
yeah, they see their kid's name in the paper, and if it's spelled wrong, they're gonna riot and shit like that. You know, Eureka, other towns. So I did that for a year, and I picked up a part-time job at one of the radio groups in Peoria, and I was basically just kind of like their little bitch that just went around and did whatever they asked me to. But the cool part of it was there was an ESPN affiliate there, and I got to run like the soundboard and do kind of the behind the scenes stuff. And there was a show they did every afternoon that when I was on there, the guys who hosted, they would let me come on and talk sometimes. And there were a few times where they let me be part of the show. And then I got to a point where they actually were going to let me start hosting on Saturdays. But by that time, I got really burnt out because I just wasn't making any money.
Yeah.
I was making like legit minimum wage at this place, and I didn't have benefits or anything. I got burnt out doing that and covering high school sports because, again, I wasn't making any money, any real money at least. And I had student loan debt, you know, rent, all these things. I wasn't from the area, so it's not like I was like living at home or anything like that. So because I got burnt out, I kind of shifted to more like social media marketing or whatever. So I moved back closer to where my mom lived, and I picked up a communications job at this like environmental services company. There was like a 4-person communications department, and they needed someone to basically run their social media because they just didn't have anyone who did, and they didn't know how to do it because all the people who worked there were like older. Like, yeah, and they didn't know how to use Facebook or LinkedIn. And I was like, okay, like they like basically gave me the keys to the car and was like, fix this. I was like, okay, I don't know what we're selling here because I don't understand this, but I'll try. And I ended up working there for about 2 years, and it was like, as much as I didn't really have a passion for like the industry or anything like that, like it was just nice to have like an easy 9 to 5, like even if I was sitting at a desk, I had my own office. My desk was just covered in like Cubs stuff, like bobbleheads and stuff. Like everyone where I knew at this place that I loved the Cubs. It was like it was a very like a lot of the Sox fans did not like it. But yeah, I did that for about 2 years, and then eventually I started dating this girl who lived in Crystal Lake. We had mutual friends, and we dated long distance for about a year. And then at that point we wanted to move in together, and she, again, I didn't live in Chicagoland at the time. So I eventually found a job in like Lincolnshire, like north suburbs.
Yeah.
And
it's like Stevenson.
Yeah.
Shout out.
Yeah. There you go. And it was at Camping World's like national headquarters. And the way they described the job was like a social media job, but it was mainly customer service. All I did was reply to comments on Facebook and like send like, and most of the people who were commenting on Facebook were people pissed off that their
very
camper or
level-headed
RV. Yeah, very angry people because their RV was in shambles or something. And I got pretty tired of that job pretty quick. And I was trying to like make my way up into like their marketing department or something. And I might have been able to, but I was there for about 6-7 months before they laid me off because the pandemic hit. And
is that when it kind of the media personality started?
Well, before I was let go, me and a buddy of mine from college, we decided to start our own podcast, kind of like how you guys. And it was like an all Chicago sports podcast. We called it the Sky's Falling podcast because every team in the city sucked. And I felt like, Chicago sports fans have a lot of passion. And when things are going bad, we think the world is ending. We think about taking a headfirst dive into Lake Michigan, stuff like that. Pretty normal stuff, right?
Yeah.
And, we both liked all the same teams. We were both Cubs fans. So it was mainly a Chicago sports podcast without the White Sox. What it turned into was it turned, for me at least, it turned into like a great networking tool because I did exactly like kind of like what you guys did with me, just DM'd people and asked them to come on. And it was kind of a way to hopefully help promote my show. Like, I never thought that the podcast was going to take off or anything. I was at a point in my life and my career that I was content that I wasn't going to do anything in sports media. It was always like, a dream. Like I always thought like, if this podcast takes off, maybe, but like, I'm pretty content with what I'm doing.
Right.
Even though I hated that job and that I was doing full time, I was still content. I was content working in like social media marketing, whatever. I was planning on trying to find a better job eventually.
Yeah.
And then the pandemic hit, and we had started that podcast 3 months beforehand. So we picked the absolute worst time to start a sports podcast with the pandemic. 3 months. With no sports. So it kind of, we did I remember probably the best time doing it was when The Last Dance was airing on ESPN every Sunday. And we would do recaps and, all through that, I ended up meeting a bunch of people in Chicago media and stuff like Kevin Kaduk, who's like our head of content. I met him through doing that. And on top of doing that podcast, I also started writing about the Cubs for this website called On Tap Sportsnet. They have a podcast called Cubs on Tap. I'm still really good friends with a lot of the guys over there. I support them immensely. Like I truly hope that they take off and do well. Just because they're really good dudes, and they're a lot like kind of like what you guys are doing here, just drinking beers, having a good time, whatever. And that's the kind of vibe they give off. And anyway, I was doing my podcast, and I started doing that because again, I got laid off. I was bored, and we were all stuck inside, and so even like the pandemic was one of the wildest, weirdest, and awful times of my life. But it was also like it was a blessing in disguise because I was collecting unemployment. I was making money by delivering food for Grubhub and doing all this podcasting stuff just because there was nothing else online. Yeah. And so, again, networked really well with my own podcast and doing the Cubs podcast for them. Their Cubs podcast really took off because of me. I don't say that because I think it did. Their president of the website told me, he was like, dude, you're really good. Like you need to do whatever you're doing to keep this because we're getting the most viewership on the Cubs podcast than we ever have. And I'm, again, this is during like a time when there's nothing happening and all this. And like, it was like the first time really of like my quote unquote media career where I actually felt confidence from like, I guess a boss or someone like giving me the confidence that I can do this, that I'm actually good at this. And I like took it and ran with it, and we grew the show, and then the games started playing in 2020. And, then we really took off in 2021. I felt like in terms of like, not necessarily popularity, but like trying to grow it a lot more because games were happening, and the Cubs made it hard since they weren't very good after the deadline, obviously. And they traded everyone off and stuff. But again, like I know my brand really started to grow on social media. So that was cool. That was great. I did this whole thing in May of 2021 where like the Cubs played really bad going into this series against the Dodgers, and that, the Dodgers were good. Right. And I said on our podcast, if the Cubs sweep the Dodgers, I'll eat an entire bottle of mayonnaise. And then of course the Cubs went on to sweep the Dodgers in this random series in May. And so I did like this live stream of me like eating this entire bottle of mayonnaise. And it was one of the dumbest things I've ever done. But like, I think that's when like that's when my social media presence like finally took off. Like
mayonnaise,
people, me chugging some mayonnaise. It was I don't talk about this story very often, but I always like say happy anniversary every time like the date comes around.
Was it Hellman's?
I believe it was Hellman's. Yes, I do believe. And it was like the squeeze bottle. So I was like just holding it over my face.
Absolutely disgusting. Okay.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So Kevin Kaduk sees you
chugging mayonnaise,
chugging some mayonnaise, and he's like, let's look this guy. This is our guy.
We were close before that. Like I had him on my podcast like the year before in 2020. He was like one of the first guests I ever had on my show because at the time he was doing his newsletter. It was called like Midway Minute, I believe. And I saw him promoting it on my timeline one day, and I asked him, if he wanted to come on and promote it. And in turn, I was hoping he would promote us, and he did. And you know, he had like 12,000 followers and I had like 600. I was like, you know, whatever, if this works, cool. If not, you know, I made a cool friend. And, you know, again, fast forward a year later, my social media brand or, you know, presence starts to grow a little bit. And, you know, it was cool. Like, it was something I had never really experienced before, obviously. I think I learned a lot about how to grow a brand online and stuff like that during that time. And I wish that's what I would have learned how to do in college more so now than just like writing and reporting and stuff like that. But anyway, because of that, whenever CHGO launched in March of 2022, like Kevin actually, like 3 weeks before we launched, he DMs me. And I'm working at home. At this point, I have a different job. I'm working at this job in Evanston as a social media person at this place in Evanston. And I'm working remote on a random Friday in February 2022. And I get a DM from Kevin. He's like, hey, I got a cool opportunity for you. You got time to, you know, can I give you a call and talk to you about it? And at this point, like, me and Kevin are cool, like internet friends. Like, we've talked before. He's been on my podcast, but like, I'm not like friends with him or anything like that. Like, I didn't know who he really was. I just knew he used to work for Yahoo and like, he's a dad and he likes Chicago sports. Like, that's all I knew. And I was like, okay, I mean, I'm at home doing nothing anyway, procrastinating, doing my actual job. So I take his phone call and he starts telling me about CHGO. And I straight up said to him, like, you're bullshitting me, right? Like, this is a really sick joke. Like, I don't believe you, all this stuff. And no, like, next thing I know, like, he's telling me about this. He wants me to do the CHGO Cubs podcast. And
that's
great. You know, next thing I know, in a week or two, I'm in a Airbnb with Luke Stuckmeyer, a guy who I watched on my television during the World Series, and like all this shit. And it was one of the more like rewarding months of my life in March of 2022. Like, because I did all that podcasting stuff for free, like you guys, like, you just doing it for fun. Like, it got to a point for me, like, I'd given up on my media career so much that I was like, I just wanted to talk about sports for fun. You know, there was no thing behind it. I just did it for fun, and I just wanted to talk about how the Cubs either ruined or made my day, or the Bulls or the Bears or whatever, you know, like, that's all I wanted to do. And Kevin gave me that opportunity with the Cubs, and obviously I built a bigger brand as a Cubs fan than I had anything else. And yeah, man, like, it's the last 2 years have just been incredible. There's a lot of people who have a lot of experience at CHGO. Like, Adam Hogue has been doing this for like 15 years, right? And Luke's been doing this for like 15, 20 years. And Herb Lawrence has been in this city's industry for a long time. And
then CHGO's been good to us too. We've had a lot of you guys on.
Yeah. And then it's like me, and then like Greg Braggs, who was a bricklayer, you know, and Sean Anderson, who, you know, he's just fresh out of college almost. Ryan Herrera, who does CHGO Cubs with me, you know, he was like part-time with MLB.com before coming to CHGO. Like, so we have a group of people who are experienced and well-known. We also have a bunch of like up-and-coming people, and
good mix.
Yeah, it is a great mix. And there's no like pretending or acting or anything on our sets. Like, we all are who we are. And yeah, it's a really rewarding job. And when I really say it's a dream, it really is, especially with the way I got there. I mean, I got there based off because of the internet and social media and just being a fan. And with the way that media is shaped now, it's like, that's how you do it. Like, I would never tell anyone if they want to go into media to go to college. I would never tell anyone to go to college ever again to do media, unless you legit want to be part of like the big J journalism group, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Go to Syracuse.
So so you go
to Northwestern, right?
So you get this dream job, right? And you know, you start and you're having that kind of, I don't know, crazy moment where you're seeing all these guys that you've seen on TV. And so you fast forward a couple years now, right? It's been 2 years since. I'm sure so many crazy moments like that have happened throughout the time that you've been there. You know, you mentioned being a huge Illini fan. Io, working with you guys directly, you know, coming on set and stuff like that, meeting him in person, I'm sure was a huge moment. But Was that the biggest, or was there another moment that stands out to you as like, this is pretty insane? I can't believe this is happening right now.
I won't lie. It was like, there's a picture of me and Ayo Dosunmu that someone took for me that I actually tweeted it out like a few weeks ago because he had like a career high night. So I like retweeted that old photo. And I have like the biggest grin on my face because it was like I watched the kid coming up as a freshman, you know, in like 2017, 2018, and like just being able to watch his entire college career and see him have success in the NBA was it's kind of like watching a prospect come up through the Cubs system and then like turn into an all-star like Chris Bryant or Javi Baez, right? Anthony Rizzo. I would put that up there, but I think meeting Ben Zobrist and having him on our podcast ranks number one. Sitting next to the World Series MVP was not on the bingo card ever.
Yeah, that was recently too, right?
Yeah, it was like last August.
That's awesome.
And the reason we got him on the show, and this is not a brag, but like I was the reason we got him on the show because he posted on social media for the first time in like 4 years.
Yeah, I actually messaged him during that time too. He was like starting his own little company, own brand. Yeah,
right. He started his own nonprofit or whatever, and I was like, oh, like there was like an email on this website or whatever, and so I was like, if I, you know, just shoot my shot here and say, hey, like we'd love to help promote this. If you guys doing an event in Chicago, like we get a lot of listeners. People would love to learn what you're doing and catch up with you and all this stuff. And I think Ben did a really good job of, you know, perceiving to people that he was a great guy. But he really is a great dude. Yeah. Like we didn't have to pay him to come on or anything like that. And so many people who are going, like especially current athletes that are going on, whether it's The Score or ESPN 1000, like they're all getting paid. Like Aaron Rodgers going on Pat McAfee, getting paid millions of dollars or thousands of dollars, whatever it is, to go on a show to talk for like 30 minutes or whatever. Ben Zobrist, the World Series MVP, came on our podcast just out of the kindness of his heart to help promote his nonprofit, but also talk Cubs with us, talk about the World Series, and just like, you know, talk to Cubs fans. Like he's, of all the athletes that I have met in my 2 years at CHGO, he is the number one, most genuine, nicest dude. Like I will always defend that guy if anyone ever slanders him, which no one does because he really is like a nice guy.
Right. And it's just like, okay, I'm going to have to pivot because we're talking about the Cubs of yesteryear, and those are like the glory days, and we all remember 2016. Right. And I know Evan and I used to, you know, drive. We drove from Illinois to Arizona for like spring training 2014 when that ball started rolling. Nice. We've been to spring training a couple times. So let's talk about spring training. The season's starting. Let's talk about this year's team.
Sure.
And how do you think Cubs fans should be feeling right now about this team? I mean, there's a couple players still out there that haven't been signed. The roster isn't popping off paper at all. What do you think?
Who's that one player you guys are thinking of?
Aesop Choi has not been signed. Brendan LaHair.
Yeah, Brian LaHair. Reed Johnson. Yeah. How do I feel about the team? I mean, listen, like I feel like a lot of, maybe this is just on social media, but I feel like a lot of the Cubs fan base is kind of divided right now. Like a lot of fans are actually really excited because they were excited to see a lot of these young guys play, right? Especially because they're going to have a lot of like top tier prospects debut this year, whether it's Cade Horton or Owen Casey, perhaps, or Matt Shaw, Pete Cora Armstrong.
Yeah, seeing more at PCA.
He could make the opening roster. He could be up in May. You know what I mean? Like I don't know how the Cubs view it. I think a lot of these spring training games are going to answer that question, right? I guess for me, I feel underwhelmed because I feel like the feeling that a lot of those fans feel this spring is kind of like what I felt last spring, like hoping that team would find a way to, you know, get into the playoffs with what they have and see some like extremes hit, like a Justin Steele turn into a top tier pitcher, and Nico and Dansby be, you know, the Gold Glovers that they were, and see Seiya and Happ be productive. And, you know, I thought we'd see a little bit more prospects even come up last year, and, you know, We didn't see Canario until September, and that didn't even he didn't even really get an opportunity. He hit a grand slam, and then David Ross sat him the next day, right? We didn't see PCA until September, and he didn't even really play either. And I felt like we would have saw a little bit of what I feel like we're going to see this year, last season, and we just didn't. We saw Morel, we saw Mervis, and Mervis didn't necessarily work out. I'm not out on him, but
did not mash.
He did not mash, right? I think Morel basically proved that he probably should have been on the opening day roster last year, and I think there's a lot of people excited about him this year, which is great. They have a lot of young players and a lot of guys to get excited about. Do they have that star though? Do they have that Chris Bryant, or even Addison Russell, who was a top 5 prospect in all baseball when he came up, right? He didn't pan out to be anything like that, but there was excitement behind that, and they have some guys, and PCA could be that guy. Maybe maybe the league is sleeping on him a little bit because he's not a top 10 prospect in baseball, but he's a top 20 guy in baseball.
Yeah,
they think he's going to be best. They think he's going to be the best defensive outfielder of this graduating prospect class or whatever, right? There's exactly. Can he hit though? And so I feel underwhelmed because a lot of the excitement that some fans have is basically what I had last year. And with how the season ended, I was more hopeful for a big splash in the offseason. And at this point, even if they do sign Bellinger, I'm still going to feel underwhelmed. You could have traded for Juan Soto. You could have signed Yamamoto.
Could have done more.
Yeah, you could have done more. You could have made a blockbuster trade because you have so much prospect depth, And so I feel like I'm in the middle where no matter what, I'm going to get excited come opening day. But as of right now, with Bellinger still available or Matt Chapman or Jordan Montgomery still available, I'm just more so frustrated. And then Tom Ricketts opening his mouth the other day about having to pay taxes and, we have to pay more because of the ballpark than other teams and stuff. It's just shut up, Tom. Just shut up. And I'm someone who doesn't complain about ownership and spending and all this stuff as much as, a lot of fans do. I try to give them the benefit of the doubt because I remember when I was a kid, the Tribune Company was awful as the owners of the Cubs. And Tom helped bring a championship here. He hired Theo Epstein and they did it the right way. They won a championship in a way that was fun and it makes me want to believe that that we have the right guys in place. But I think my big criticism for Jed Hoyer at this point and going into year 4 is that he just hasn't made the
big
bold
splash.
Move. Yeah, the big splash, the big move. The biggest move he's made is signing Dansby Swanson, which was at the time considered a consolation prize. And let's be real, he was better than the other 3 if you go by WAR last year, which is great, awesome. He's the best defensive shortstop in baseball, awesome, great. Him and Nico have been a great tandem defensively, and I still think there's some offense that he can be better at, but he can't be a guy who's going to lead your offense. He just isn't, right?
No, yeah. There's no stud in that lineup, right? There's no anchor. There's no someone that's going to put fear in the opposing pitcher that, I got to face this guy 3-4 times in the lineup. We don't have that guy.
I want to play a little devil's advocate here, though, because, Ricketts did say baseball is all about getting to the playoffs, right? And I think in a lot of ways that's true. This division is not that tough. And I think even with this roster, and let's say you're able to add Cody Bellinger, that makes this team pretty close to what they were last year, maybe slightly better. But I think they had a shot last year, and had Seiya not dropped that ball, God forbid.
Yeah.
But
missed it.
Yeah, I mean, don't
brutal.
remind me. Yeah, I don't even want to think back on that. I had visions of Benzovic riding his bike to Wrigley 5 seconds ago. But I think there's a chance that this team could still make the playoffs. On paper, they're nowhere near what the Dodgers look like or what anybody else looks like. But this isn't the NFL. I don't think, it's not the NBA. It's not the superstar team doesn't necessarily always win in the end. So I think they got a shot. Yeah. But I want to know who you're most optimistic about out of these prospects. Is there one that you're this guy is going to be that guy or could be that guy? I know you mentioned PCA. Is that the guy that you would say, if you're going to tie your name to this player this year, who's going to take the next step? I guess
at the MLB level, right?
But and at the MLB level, who's going to really show out this year?
Yeah. Well, I was kind of getting at this, but like, I think that there's so much young talent on this team that I do think that if everything were to go right, you know, and or not everything, but a lot, like Nico take a step, and you know, Seiya, if he could just be a little bit more consistent and not get hurt, he could be a 30 home run guy. Christopher Morel, he's going to get a full season. I think he could hit 35 bombs this year. I legitimately think that. Can Ian Happ just continue to be who he is, which is just a really solid player, you know? And, you know, I think I'm actually really optimistic about the pitching. I love the pitching. But one particular player that I'm like, that's a prospect that's going to probably debut this year is for sure Cade Horton. Like, I don't like it's crazy. Like, he's probably the most hyped up prospect the Cubs have had pitching wise since prior, right? Like, he's top 2, top 3 pitching prospect in baseball. I think the way I feel like his year could go is a lot like Brandon Pfaadt for the Diamondbacks last year, who was really good for them in the playoffs. He kind of had his struggles in you know, in the regular season, but he still somehow, some way managed to help them get in the playoffs. I remember he had a start against the Cubs in September that everyone was like, "Oh, he's got a 5-year ERA. We're gonna take care of business." And then they end up losing that game, and they didn't get anything off him. Like, he's actually really good, right? I feel like Cade Horton can make, if this team is in the playoff picture come September, if he's on the roster, I think he can help, you know, put this team a little bit over the top. It's just, you're right though, when it comes to this team doesn't have that difference maker, that big power bat or whatever. I mean, I think the two guys that you have to kind of bank on at this point are Morel or Seiya. And I think Bellinger, I don't even if they add Bellinger, I don't even think he would be that guy, because he's kind of changed the kind of player he is. He used to be just a straight power hitter, would hit 40 home runs a year, but the reason he had such a good year last year is he lowered his strikeout rate from 27% to like 15. And he was one of the best hitters with 2 strikes. And all he would do is just slap the ball out the left field. Like, so to me, he's like kind of turned into like more of a professional hitter, like not even like a straight power hitter. Like, and I like that. That's fine. He still hit almost 30 bombs, and he probably would have if he didn't get hurt in May. You know, he missed a month. So yeah, I mean, I think that the ceiling isn't much.
Could happen.
Yeah, I don't think the ceiling is much higher, even if they add Bellinger. But I'm thinking long term too. Like, I'm thinking, okay, if you add Bellinger and then you get in, then you add everyone. You find out, you answer some more questions about some of your young guys this year, and say you get in the playoffs in 2024. You go in the offseason, and maybe they finally buy at the top of the free agent market, because that's been my thing. Is like, sure, they've added players, right? They added, like, they like Seiya's deal to me could look like one of the best deals that Jed Hoyer's got by the end of his tenure. It was like 5 years, $85 million. The guy is like, we're talking about him hitting the most home runs for the team this year. You know what I mean? Like, his deal could hopefully look really good for the Cubs in a few years, right? He just, again, he needs consistency. He needs to be able to hit the, stay on the field, be more consistent. Like, it's just like there's a lot of question. You just don't know. He hasn't proven it. It's the same thing with Morel too. And
a lot of questions on the lineup up and down. It's it's a lot of the same guys coming back, but then we also have a new manager that's going to have their hands on this roster and how they're going to set the lineup, set the order. Like, what do you think? Because even you mentioned it earlier that Candelario came up, hit the bomb, and then got sat the next game. Like, what do you think Craig Counsell is going to do with this lineup? How does he improve, and how is he going to be able to like squeeze the juice out of every last bit of the players here to get the most out of them?
Yeah.
Are you buying? Or are you selling him?
Oh, I'm buying for sure, because we know, those years with Milwaukee, like, I don't know if I'm disrespecting or not, but like, I'm sorry, those Brewers rosters, they didn't scare anyone, and yet they still would, won the division multiple times. And I know Christian Yelich turned into an MVP for a couple of years for them, right? But even when he wasn't being an MVP caliber player these last couple of years, they still won. Like, it didn't necessarily make a lot of sense. They obviously had elite pitching with Corbin Burns and Brandon Woodruff and Freddie Peralta, but the Cubs have one of the best farm systems in baseball, and like we've been talking about, they're going to debut a lot of those guys, and I think he's going to not only play them, but I think he's going to put them in good position to have success. which was something I felt like David Ross just wasn't good at. And I also think he's going to make the lineup a lot different. When you look back at when the Cubs and the Brewers were playing each other last season, every single time they played Milwaukee, it was Christian Yelich and William Contreras, first two in the lineup, which is it's not normal. It's not like a prototypical lineup, right? Like Yelich, you would think would be like hitting second or third in their lineup, but he was hitting leadoff because not only was he a power threat, but he also got on base at a really high clip. He was fast, all those types of things. And Contreras, he was a power hitter too. But he also had other tools offensively that made him very good. And the point being is that he puts the best players at the top of the lineup. That means they get the most at bats. And I don't know how many times Luke on our show complained about how Bellinger was always on deck whenever the Cubs made the final out of a game because he was hitting fourth. And so, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw like a Hap Bellinger 1-2 in the lineup if they end up bringing Bellinger back. You know what I mean? Like I could see something like that. And I say Ian Happ leadoff because he had the highest on base percentage for the Cubs last year. So, like I think it could be unconventional, like something that no one really expects. But Craig Counsell has shown over his tenure with Milwaukee that it's like your best players got to get the most at bats. And like I think a lot of fans agree with that. It's just not like how it used to be when I was a kid or when you guys were younger either. Like there's no, like, you don't put the fast guy who steals 50 bases at the top of the lineup anymore, unless they're also walking at a elite clip and hit a lot, like not necessarily hit a lot of home runs, but it's just an on-base machine, right? Like, even Dexter Fowler in 2016, it's not like he was stealing bases all the time. But like when I was a kid, it really didn't matter. It was all about like, can that guy steal bases? Can he get on base?
Each spot in the order had like a prototypical kind of hitter. It's like your number one hitter is gonna be this player, your 3 is gonna be this, 4 is cleanup, 5 still gets on base pretty good hitter, not your best. But now we're seeing a lot of different variations and a lot of looking at the data, right, and what it says and how you can fix a lineup to get some runs.
I'm ready for a shakeup. I just hope for some consistency. I feel like we didn't really get that much with Ross. But what about the starting rotation? What do you think that's going to look like?
Yeah, you said you're high on pitching, and I think most Cubs fans are not. And I'm curious of why you're so high on them.
Well, we kind of talked about this on our show today too. Counsell, when he was in Milwaukee, there was a lot of times where they would give the guy that was up next in their rotation like just an extra day off or two. And I think the Cubs have a lot of depth in their rotation. Like you have Steele, Hendricks, Imanaga, Jordan Wicks, and Jamison Tyone. So obviously, like Justin Steele is probably going to be your opening day starter. Imanaga, we don't know what we're going to get, but clearly, he has a lot to play for considering the contract he got, right? Tyone, I'm optimistic about a bounce back. He pitched well at the end of last year. Hendricks, he's coming off an injury last year, and I think he surprised us all. I think he still has more left in the tank. It's not like he's been throwing gas or anything for all of his career. He's just a location guy, gets ground balls. Like at this point in his career, if he's at the back end of your rotation, like that's really good. And he brings experience. He helps young pitchers like a Jordan Wicks, who, showed that he showed what he can be last year. It'll be interesting to see how he does in a full season. But for someone like him, at how much he's getting paid for your 5 starter, like that's really, I think there's a lot of value there. Like the way I put it today is like, would you rather have Jordan Wicks as your number 5 or like Michael Wacha or like, someone like that who's going to get like a 1 or 2 year deal? And sure, they're definitely
Wacha was pretty awesome last year.
He was right. But maybe he's a bad example, but like just someone who's always been towards the back of your rotation, who has sometimes been up and down, but you're not paying a guy nearly as much money to be your 5 starter. And to me, what I want the Cubs to do, and this is how they can get their way back into spending at the top of the free agent market every year, is if you're able to develop well enough to where you can have your 5 starter be come from within, and if they're productive and you can continuously do that over and over, and not just the 5-starter, but just like back end rotation guys on top of relievers and stuff like that, then you really can afford to go out there and get the big bat that you need to be in your lineup and get the top tier starting pitcher if you need one.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Teams always do that. Atlanta, I
Right.
think of,
The
using
Dodgers,
the 5th rotation
you know?
spot as a developmental spot. Yeah, the
Right.
Dodgers, Atlanta,
So
for
like
sure.
that's the way that I look at it. Like I'd rather the Cubs spend their money at the top of the market than, on these back end dudes to try to fill a hole. Like that's kind of why the quote unquote golden era kind of died out, because they couldn't develop, man. Like Brett Anderson, he was awful. The year after the World Series, Tyler Chatwood, terrible.
Yeah.
Sure,
Yeah.
Quintana didn't live up to the hype, but he was fine. Cole Hamels, revived his career for a year or whatever. But like they really struggled at developing their own pitchers on top of just even position players too during the back end of that era. I think the one thing that they're doing right now is like, it feels like they have a ton of depth on the farm and guys who can actually make an impact. And that is the one exciting thing about this year, is that I think we're going to see a lot of those. And so if a lot of these guys show promise, then I think that might, hopefully, fingers crossed, maybe that will send them to the top of the free agent market going into 2025. And next year's class is a lot more exciting, like Corbin Burns and Juan Soto, and the names are a lot more.
So it seems like what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like it's going to be a good year. We're going to be competitive. We'll develop some talent. Division maybe, playoffs hopefully, but this team isn't competing for a championship until maybe next year.
If everything plays out,
and that's always a Cubs perspective. It's even mine. I'm a big homer, right? Like, if he has a good year and they have a good year and this guy has a good year, then the Cubs might be pretty good this year. I think we're both in agreement that we're lacking a big arm. I mean, Steele's great. Can he do it 2 years in a row? I think we still need an ace, top of the line, and a big bat. But I'm curious, Cody, your last question here, and we'll get you out of here. Your prediction for this season, man. Like, what do you think this ball club is capable of? Where do you see them at in the division? And are they making a playoff run? Are they making the playoffs?
Yeah. I mean, how many times people
everything goes right.
How many people have asked me this question, man? It's a hard question to answer, because as far as like the rumor mill out there right now, it's still, it still says basically that Bellinger is the favorite to come back to the Cubs. And I don't see the team making the playoffs without Bellinger. If they get Bellinger, I think they can make the playoffs. I don't know how many wins, but I think they can make the playoffs with Bellinger. Without Bellinger, it's going to be a tall task. And Craig Counsell will win Manager of the Year if they make the playoffs without Bellinger, in my opinion. So, I mean, without Bellinger, I think they can win 80 games. With Bellinger, I'll put it at 87. So, yeah. And to, like, you were talking about the pitching, like, sure, like that rotation, but like, I don't know about you, but like Javier Assad really impressed me last year.
Yeah.
In the role that they used to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Alzolay had a great year too. We're going to talk about him real quick too. Like, he's going to be that shutdown closer again 2 years in a row. Is that just him, or was it just a year of everything went right?
I think he can be it. What the difference is that you just can't throw him out there every single time you need him to. You can't throw him out there to close every single day. And I think they have a lot more depth in the bullpen now too. Adding Nearest. Julian Merriweather's kind of set himself into the back end there. Mark Leiter Jr., same with him. You can't throw him out there every day. I'm optimistic about Jose Cuas. I know a lot of fans are already done with him, but I think with that arm angle he throws with, it brings a different look to hitters coming out of the bullpen. He's young. He obviously was like a project that they brought in for Velasquez. And I know everyone's like upset that because Velasquez went off for the Royals in 2 meaningless months. But again, those were 2 meaningless months for a team that lost 100 games. We'll see if he can do it for a full season before I say that we lost the trade. Luke Little, who, didn't really get an opportunity last year because David Ross wouldn't use him, throws gas, man. Like I'm optimistic about him. Daniel Palencia, my guy, Rich Biesterfield, who he takes a lot of great pictures, big kind of a photographer on Cubs Twitter. He put some pictures up of Palencia today, said he dotted 100 multiple times. So again, it's just miles per hour, but still, like I think there's optimism with those two guys. And then they got Almonte in that trade for Michael Busch too, who has experience, right? How the Cubs will use him, I don't know. But they have a lot of dudes. I think they have at least more depth, and hopefully some of them all just or not all of them, but like more of them than not carve out a role in this bullpen. So, but like,
hope so, man.
Right. And when you talk about the rotation, like I was saying, like guys getting extra days off or two, like
you're going to see some guys plugged in.
Yeah. Like say they want to give Imanaga an extra day or two off because he's just not used to pitching in the major leagues. He's going to pitch more. He's going to pitch more in the major leagues than he did in Japan. Right. Yep. So that you can spot start with Assad or Hayden Wisniewski or Drew Smiley. Yeah. And it's just like a spot start. And hell, I think those guys will be useful in the bullpen too. But I think the fact that you have some reliable arms there that can go out there and throw you 5 innings is huge. And, I think they might have made the playoffs last year if Steele wasn't, dragging at the end. I mean, he pitched the most innings of his career last year, and going into September, he was really solid. His last 2 starts though weren't great, and a large part of that is just because he was tired, man. Like it was something new to him. He just didn't adjust, and so I do think the council is going to do something like this because he did this in Milwaukee, where guys get extra rest. So the pitching, again, I'm really optimistic about it. We have the best defensive infield, whether, it's Morel at third or Madrigal, whatever, first base, whatever. As long as you have those 2 guys up the middle, you have one of the best defensive infields in baseball. And all the pitchers the Cubs have, they're all ground ball guys. And so I think pitching and defense is going to be the strength of this team again. Will they score enough runs though? That's the thing, man. Like how many 1-run games am I going to have to endure this year? You know what I mean? Like that's what holds me back. So that's why Bellinger is such a big deal to me, because he's just a really good baseball player, and you can move them all across the field. And like everyone
that's going to hold everything on this team together pretty much.
Drive in runs,
at least for this year. And he at least will be able to help ease in some of these young guys. Like, the only thing that sucks about re-signing Bellinger is that it kind of blocks Alexander Canario, but like Bellinger is more proven, man. Like, I just don't want to go into a year where we have to rely on prospects to win, and that's why I was hoping for a blockbuster trade to get a starting pitcher or, Juan Soto this past offseason, that's why I feel underwhelmed about the entire offseason. So, it is what it is. I hope they're right. Like I've criticized a lot in the last, month, because this whole Bellinger thing has just been so exhausting.
Yeah.
But
it really has.
But at the same time, like if they prove me and other fans who are criticizing how they're spending and all this wrong and make the playoffs, like I'll give them all the credit. Like I do think that they are developing the right way. It was something that they really lacked during, the best years that I've ever seen this organization perform at, but they just have to prove it, man. Like, and I think they can in some aspects, just because entering September last year, they were projected to win 90 games. And then just like that entire September, they just fell apart.
Whole team was out of gas.
Just because they didn't have enough depth at the end of the day. To me, they didn't have enough depth. People want to blame the bullpen. People want to blame whatever. I think they didn't have enough depth, and I didn't think their offense was consistent enough. So you're inserting a lot more talent this year. You're not going to have a Trey Mancini or Eric Hosmer, Tucker Barnhart taking at bats. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to have better players taking those at bats this year. On top of just another year of development, or of hopefully guys developing to be better players. Like, I'm sure you guys are excited to see how Nico improves this year compared to last year, right? Like, yeah. And like I said, Seiya earlier and Morel, like I just think superstardom is on the verge for Christopher Morel, man. Like if he turns into an all-star this year, this team is going to find a way to make the playoffs somehow. Like I just don't know. They have to prove it. He has to prove it.
A lot
Yeah.
to be proved. A lot to be
Yes,
proved.
absolutely. And that's what sucks because they could have just, traded for Juan Soto and maybe sign Yamamoto, and then we'd be, favorites to win this division. But, they chose this route, and now they have to prove it to me, man. Yeah.
Cody, thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate it. We'll follow you at Cody_CHGO on Twitter. We'll follow CHGO Cubs all year long. Thanks again for being here tonight.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you guys for having me on, and keep doing your thing, whether you guys are trying to build this into something or not. But like, if you're just doing it for fun, like that's my advice. I always give this to people. Like, if you're doing this for some sort of reason or not, just continue to do it if you're having fun doing it, man.
Definitely. Yeah. And we are. Yeah. Thanks. Appreciate that. Thanks for being here, man.
For sure.
All right. Thanks again to our guest, Cody Delmendo. Again, you can find him on Twitter at Cody_CHGO. Thanks to Cody for joining us today. For Dan Sloak, I'm Evan Bierman. You've been listening to the Domestic Draft Podcast. If you're listening on Spotify, don't forget to rate the show. You can find us on Twitter at Domestic Draft, on Instagram at Domestic Draft Podcast. Our website is domesticdraft.com, and you can watch the show on YouTube. Just search up Domestic Draft and drop us a sub. Thanks again for listening. Cheers.
Cheers.